Should you move to South America for more freedom, lower taxes, and a second passport? Some say it's a terrible idea, and I'm going to walk you through the pros and cons. So we see a lot of, especially Americans and Canadians, but also some Europeans moving to South America for a number of reasons. We're going to talk about that today. But I wanted to share a comment with you from a gentleman named Wolf who thinks, no, South America is not the place to go. And he says, I just moved in 2020 from South America to Europe to improve quality of life. Security, healthcare, education, everything is so much superior to the Americas. Good government institutions need to be paid, hence taxes. Go to a place where you pay little taxes, well, let's say Paraguay or Chile, both of which I know very well. I know Paraguay probably better than anyone. 30 years of residence. Get seriously sick or get robbed and shot, and then we'll see. Generally a huge flaw of Mr. Henderson's videos, so one-dimensional, and so much obsession of getting a collection of passports. Personally, I would very much support a worldwide ban of countries selling passports. It's just immoral. I am, if it's your first time here, the aforementioned Mr. Henderson. I'm the founder of Nomad Capitalist. We're a boutique consulting firm that helps 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce their taxes overseas, protect their assets, build options with second passports, life overseas. I'm also the host of the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. And obviously this person has sort of an issue with the idea of paying low taxes. They have an issue with the idea of having multiple citizenships. We'll set that aside and maybe cover that in a future episode. What I would suggest is just to start in the context of if you're a 7- or 8-figure entrepreneur investor, if you have a high income, if you have a high net worth, if you have capital gains coming up, taxes become more of a consideration for you. Sure, if you're going to pay $10,000 in taxes living in Europe, you may very well want to do that if taxes are your big consideration. If you're going to pay $10 million of taxes, now it's worth considering, because when you can afford to pay $10 million in taxes, or even $1 million in taxes, or heck, even somewhere in the 6 figures in taxes, you can start affording to get away from the issues that he's talking about. Now, here's the good news. You can live in Europe and you can still pay low taxes. Okay, South America is not particularly a low tax area. You've got countries like Uruguay and Chile, which have certain tax exemptions for foreigners for a certain period of time. You've got countries like Paraguay, which are relatively tax-friendly. Uruguay, which is also generally tax-friendly, even after the exemption period. You've got countries in Central America, which are relatively tax-friendly. But for the most part, if you're going to live in South America, you either need to be paying some taxes somewhere else, which will help you, let's say, in a country like Ecuador, or you're going to spend not the entire year. That's going to be one of your international bases, so that you're not going to become a taxpayer there. You'll pay tax somewhere else. That tax rate may be as low as 0, and you're going to live in Colombia 3 or 4 months a year. You're going to contribute to their economy. You're going to buy property. You're going to do the things they want you to do to be a legal resident, but you're not going to spend all your time there and pay tax. So if you're going to live somewhere full-time, and it comes down to South America versus Europe, there are places in Europe, look at Italy, look at Greece, look at Jersey, look at Gibraltar. You have potentially the ability in some of those places to pay 0. You have, for most people, the ability to pay some fixed amount of money, which, depending on how much you're making, could be a very small tax rate. Could be 1, 2, 3, 5, 7%, depending on your income, depending on your capital gains. You just pay a flat amount. Switzerland has long had some version of that system. You have all kinds of countries that offer various tax exemptions that don't tax your foreign income all around Europe, including in Western Europe. And these countries often have high, what we call headline tax rates. You can move to the UK, you can move to Portugal, you can move to Ireland, you can move to plenty of places. You won't be paying the full tax rate that everyone else is, at least on all of your income. So if the idea is, I want to live somewhere full-time and my concerns are security, healthcare, education, and I believe that that's superior in Europe, well then pick one of the numerous tax-friendly countries in Europe where you can go and get that. Now, let's go through his issues piece by piece. Security. Obviously, South America, there are places that have security. I would argue if you're watching this as the 7 or 8 or 9 or 10-figure entrepreneur investor, you can find a way to deal with security. I spend part of my time in Bogota, Colombia. I spend part of my time in Mexico City, where Nomad Capitalist Live will be held in 2022. I have not gotten into problems. Where I have gotten into problems is in capital cities in Central America, and perhaps was on the verge of getting into some problems in Johannesburg, South Africa. Everywhere else in the world, I've been around at midnight, I've been around at 1 in the morning. You will, with my own little neighborhood, see me walking around in parts of Latin America at night. And when you take precautions, when you live in the right area, when you go to the right places, when you drive the right car, when you just follow best practices, it can be safe. Now, some people will say, hey, listen, why do I want to have to go through all that? Well, sure. Some of the safest places in the world are in Dubai, like Dubai, the Middle East. Georgia's been one of the safest countries. People complain about those as well. They say, oh, I want the adventurous South America. It is more of an adventure, no doubt. You have a certain culture. There's a certain cultural proximity in some ways to what you might find in the United States or Canada. You certainly got a wide number of countries that speak a common language that you can use, and it's a relatively straightforward language to learn. And so you have access to a lot of places. You have a social scene that many people prefer over other parts of the world. You have a certain climate. You have just a certain vibe. And if you like that, then that's great. I think you can deal with the security element. If you want more of the European culture, if you want that, then by all means go to Europe, and you can still pay low taxes. I know that Wolf maybe doesn't like to hear that there are places in Europe where I could go and pay 1 or 2 or 3% in Western Europe, but that's what some of these countries are offering. So if that's what you want to do, by all means do it. Healthcare, I think that there is decent healthcare in the Americas. I think Mexico is probably one of the best, and people do travel to Mexico from around the world for care. Panama has some good facilities. We've talked about Brazil before. Certainly, if I'm looking for the absolute best in critical care, I'm not going to seek out most places in South America. I'm going to seek out perhaps Western Europe, but probably where I would be is either in Istanbul, Dubai, or Southeast Asia, whether it's Thailand, whether it's Malaysia, whether it's Singapore. Those are the places that I personally would go. And by the way, those are places that are wide open. Everybody, really, even if you don't have the world's best passport. So am I going to seek out care there? No. But I've been to the doctor in Bogota. I've had particular issues. I've had it solved. I've been to doctors in Mexico City. I've been relatively impressed much of the time. I've had family members who've been sick in various places in Mexico. And so I don't think that the issue of healthcare, just in terms of day-to-day healthcare and things that pop up, is a problem in Latin America, but you're probably not going to seek it out. And so, listen, if you're living the nomad capitalist lifestyle, you can live in South America and you can go do a checkup somewhere else once a year, do a full regimen, take a trip to Kuala Lumpur, take a trip to Dubai. That could play into parts of your tax strategy, residence strategy, citizenship strategy, depending on where you're going. Go where you're treated best. And if you want to live in Latin America, then maybe you get healthcare somewhere else. But I think on a day-to-day basis, you're likely to be fine, unless you're living somewhere off the beaten track in Nicaragua or Bolivia. Obviously that's going to be worse. I think you know what you're getting into. He mentions education. Obviously, sure, Europe may have better education. There's also people who are leaving the Western world right now because they're tired of what is being taught at schools. And I see a lot of people moving to homeschooling, moving to what I've talked about for years, which is the idea of hiring a tutor. You can bring that tutor with you wherever you go. Get your tutor a residence permit. Latin America, one of the easier parts of the world to get a residence permit. You hire a tutor on some kind of contract. You pay them a salary. They can use that salary, and then after a certain number of months, they can qualify for residence, and they can come with you to wherever it is that you want to go. Most countries in Latin America will let them in, or you can get them a proper job, set up there. So, in terms of education, I think that you want to create your own infrastructure. If you want to go to Europe, right? Don't explain it. I had an old friend who in the United States, he'd say, why is it so many people when they move to Las Vegas, they make so many excuses? Oh, the weather's great, and the schools, and the roads are very well. When you move from Los Angeles to Texas, I got a new job. When you move from Los Angeles to Vegas, it's the climate is good for my. Listen, we get it. You don't want everyone to think you've got a giant gambling addiction. You got to have 11 different reasons. If you want to live in Europe, just live in Europe. And again, you can do that in a tax-friendly way. It may involve a bit more planning, but just live in Europe. Now let's get to the core point, because this is what it all comes down to with so many folks who I think don't agree with the philosophy. Oh, there's not great healthcare? Great. If you can afford to do what we're talking about, you can afford to go up to the United States if you think that's where the healthcare is so great. Go to London if that's where you think the healthcare is so great. Go there for your care. He says good government institutions need to be paid. And that assumes this idea that in Europe, all the institutions are good. Do you think that politicians in Europe are really so much superior to politicians in other parts of the world? No, listen, no doubt there are parts of the world where corruption is more endemic, no doubt. There are also countries in Europe where corruption is endemic. And by and large, corruption in Europe, corruption in the United States is higher than you think. I'm not talking about Scandinavia or a couple of other countries, but corruption is higher. Now, maybe you can't participate in that corruption, Maybe it's only corruption at the highest levels. But good government institutions, to say that because you're paying them that they're necessarily good is quite unfair. And so the idea that hence paying taxes means you're going to do better. Well, how do you explain the fact that I can go and live in any handful of Western European countries and my tax rate will be less than 1% living there? It will take me more effort to set it up. I will have to jump through a few more hoops. But why is it that does that mean that those countries aren't effective? Does that mean that those countries don't match the criteria? Am I going to get robbed and shot, as he says? Oh, you'll be robbed and shot. I've been all over South and Central America with very, very few issues. And again, the places where I had issues, I've never recommended. I wouldn't go. There's no reason to go to a capital city in Central America outside of Panama City. And if you call it Mexico City, Central America, then that too. There's no reason to go to Managua. There's no reason to go to Tegucigalpa. There's no reason to go to any of these places. And so, yeah, if you are a successful person, if you're paying so much in taxes, you should go where you're treated best. And so when we're comparing South America and Europe, again, Colombia, not a great place to live year-round. You could live in Portugal year-round, sure. But if you're open to moving around, if you're open to living in different places, why not do a little bit of both? Why not spend time in South America? Why not spend time in Europe? Maybe Europe's the base, you go to South America. Maybe you flip it, right? But there are plenty of places. Uruguay, for example, it's extremely safe down there. Chile, safe in many areas, although the government has very much been moving in the wrong direction in recent years and more so recently. And so I know that South America is the perfect place to compare to. If you want, again, adventure, if you want to track to a second passport, it's going to be a lot easier to get second passports with lesser amounts of presence, with easier conditions to get in the door, with perhaps more flexibility, an easier language to learn, potentially a couple of years faster in South America than it would be in Europe. So that's a benefit. And by the way, South American passports are pretty good. And here's what I would also say, by the way. Having a bolt hole in South America, not the worst thing to have at a time when the world is at war. I would no doubt imagine that the kind of person who would write this comment is the same person who would say, why do you talk about Europe? Why do you talk about Eastern Europe? Don't you know there's a war coming? Don't you know there's like World War III is coming? Well, where would you want to be when World War III coming out? Yeah, I would say that Uruguay might not be the worst place to go, and having a residence or having worked towards citizenship there, having a home there, that might be a nice thing to have in there. So no doubt, South America perhaps offers more on-the-ground freedom on an everyday basis. It offers a certain quality of life that certain people like, or food, or dating opportunities, or whatever. But when it comes to South America versus Europe, they both need to be structured properly for tax. And so you get to make a decision. The good news is there are lots of countries that you think aren't tax friendly that actually are. Perhaps that's the biggest takeaway. And so if you're choosing South America because you think, oh, these emerging countries are better for tax, there are plenty of countries that are better for tax. And that's the good news. You get to choose where you feel comfortable, whether you're living one place all year round as Wolf does, or whether you're splitting your time up as I do. You get a little bit of taste of everywhere.